Here we are, Data Protection Breakfast Club, the Wall Street episode, starring two lawyers from Fenwick and West, Evan Bienstock and Jennifer Stanley, two super intelligent attorneys in different practice groups at Fenwick. Evan is a VC, venture tech lawyer, and Jennifer is an IP tech privacy gaming lawyer on the team at Fenwick. Fenwick is one of the best tech firms in the world. Did the Facebook IPO, OG in the tech world for sure, and we're really blessed to have them because they see so many deals. They have tons of clients from, you know, all sorts of ranges of tech companies, and it's their bread and butter. So it's really interesting to talk to them.
Yeah, they're a great firm, man. I've used them at multiple in-house gigs, and you know, they can deliver anything, man. Like you said, they can do a Facebook IPO, or they can send you a junior associate secondee to help you with, you know, I don't know, commercial transactions. Like, they've got the whole scope of like tech support, tech company legal support wrapped into the office. Even non-lawyers. I think I might be wrong about this, but I feel like they have like a pool of like non-attorney privacy gurus that also kind of help with compliance and stuff.
What I really like about them as a group, particularly these lawyers too, that we're going to talk to, but like, you can tell when there's an issue and they're talking about it that they've dug in. Like, they don't know the answer, they'll tell you, but you know, 9 times out of 10, it's, yeah, like, we've dug in pretty deep on this one, and here's our take, and have a discussion about an outcome, and they're willing to give you practical advice. And that's why it's good to talk to people like this, and in this kind of scenario in real life, when you need stuff. So it's really awesome that they were able to come join us here.
They're awesome. And before we jump into the chat with them, like, you know, Wall Street's one of my favorite movies. Like, I mean, for all sorts of reasons. I like the updated version too. Like, and you know, the Leonardo. I mean, what would it had a new name, but I don't remember what it was called. But
I don't remember the name, but second.
Yeah, whatever. Like part 2. I don't even know what to call it, but it was good. Yeah, it was. Yeah, that one was good too. But the original, like, Michael Douglas, was this his best movie? I don't know, man. He was good.
Tough to say, right? You got a lot of Michael Douglas movies on the list there. This has got to be.
I think it's the one with Sharon Stone. I forget what's the name of that thing.
Basic Instinct is pretty good.
Basic Instinct is pretty solid. I think this was his best work. This one.
Have you seen
Wall Street
Romancing the Stone?
What is it?
Have you seen Romancing the Stone?
No.
That's probably one of the movies that put him on the map.
Is that it? So I have to check that out. I haven't seen that. I will. That's my homework.
That's a good one as well.
What a name for a movie.
The Game is a good one too.
The Game. That is a great movie too. He's a badass. But I will say this, like, how old is this movie? What year was this? Do you remember?
I don't know, 83?
Early 80s. Early 80s. He could wear that outfit right now and he'd look like a boss walking down Water Street in New York City, right? Like, I mean, the suspenders vibe is still here, a little bracelet, maybe minus the cigarette. I feel like the cigarette is too far, but like the outfit would work.
He'd be vaping now.
He'd have a Juul or whatever that thing is. Yeah. Anyway, super dope movie. We need to, if this podcast, you know, if we can monetize this podcast into billions of dollars, as I know we will, my first gift to you is going to be a red leather chair.
My wife's a vegan, so no thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we'll do synthetic
here
leather.
It is. It's our chat with Jennifer and Evan. Looking forward to that. Here it is. All right. Here we are, Data Protection Breakfast Club, joined by Jennifer Stanley and Evan Bienstock from Fenwick and West. Pedro, you wanna do an intro? Usually have an 80s related question to ask of the crew. The theme here is Wall Street. This is why Evan this is not his normal everyday venture tech lawyer garb here.
No, he's looking good. He's looking straight out of the movie, man. Here's a good question. Like, you see I think those are like Tandies back there behind Michael Douglas on your background. You know, top of the line stuff there. What's the first computer you guys had, and when was it? Man, hopefully it's 80s, but it might be 90s, I'm guessing. But when?
Oh, I mean, I had an Apple IIe.
Nice.
Which must have been I'm trying to think of the house I lived in to put myself in the time zone. 1984.
Nice.
I
Oh, you were way out ahead of the game, man.
You
Yeah.
were.
was coding.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Ireland, and we did not have a computer at home during the 80s, although I'm absolutely a kid of the 80s. But I remember learning in what would have been the equivalent of middle school to program in BBC Basic, which is super basic. And I would say that was probably around 1982 or 3. And that was my first foray into computers, which looked not unlike what Michael has behind him in his image from the movie there.
We had a Mac standalone, the one piece, everything with the keyboard. I don't know what model that was, but we had a 2E and a 2GS at school. And that was later. That was still in the 80s, but it was a few years later after that. Or maybe it was blending together.
Floppy disk, right?
Yep, floppy disks,
Floppy disks, yeah.
hard disks.
But floppies were the little ones, right? Floppy disks were the little ones. Hard disks were the floppy ones. That's how I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, did you all play Oregon Trail?
Yeah, and Carmen San Diego, man, I used to play that all the time.
I played
I was just gonna say, go ahead.
Load Runner and Spy Hunter were big for me.
Spy Hunter, that's old school
That's
stuff
awesome.
right there.
Yeah.
I remember a lot of Carmen San Diego. I think I'm a little younger than you guys, but my first computer was in the early 90s and it was a Compaq. But the first time I remember Compaq Presario, remember that? Yeah. My first computer that I remember using, I was in kindergarten. So this would have been like 87. And it was definitely an Apple computer, like the tiny ones. I don't think it was even like, maybe there was a mouse involved, but I don't think so. And to load the computer, you had to put
That's impressive. You were doing that in kindergarten. We weren't doing that back in Ireland in kindergarten, I can tell you.
Well, we had one computer for the school, okay? Like, I think it was in the library or something like that. And it was like I remember the Apple logos, the colored, different color Apple logo, Apple Macintosh vibes. And then we got a computer lab where we had like 4 or 5, and that's where Carmen San Diego came in. But anyway, that's my 80s computational experience.
We'll come back to this, but let's let our guests so give us like a quick intro of the focus, of your practice, and we have a bunch of interesting things to talk about from there.
Sure. I'll start off with just sort of my practice. So I've been a venture lawyer for 18 years now. I actually practiced for 8 or 9 years in Boston, and the remainder has been in New York, and representing tech companies, across a broad variety range of industries, but tech companies at all stages of their growth, right? So from zero, from before there were Y Combinator and 500 startups and tech stars, we were sort of hanging around universities and hanging around MIT in like the early 2000s, and helping founders sort of start companies out of the MIT Media Lab, et cetera, and helping them from zero effectively to exit, and everything sort of in between. So in my sort of 18 years, I've done a lot of varying transactions, from public offerings and just sort of general public company work and overnight shelf takedowns and pipes and all of that, general corporate stuff, M&A, lots and lots of venture. And then I mostly do venture now, private company work, mostly on the company side, but I would also say maybe 25-30% investor side deals. And now, when there's an IPO, I'll hand it off to the securities group. I don't do that stuff anymore. So that's me, general corporate lawyer from zero on. I'll let Jennifer go, and then Jennifer's been at Fenwick longer than I have, so I'll let her give the Fenwick story for a minute too.
Sure.
So I've been practicing law for north of 20 years. You can probably guess my age as we get through this discussion as the 80s references come in, but I've been at Fenwick for 20 years, shockingly, despite my youthful looks and demeanor. And I'm an IP transactional lawyer. So I focus on mainly business to consumer products and services from a tech perspective. And back when I was in law school in Ireland, actually a 1980s character influenced the trajectory of my career, a musician called Adam Ant. Adam and the Ants, for people who are really old, may know them. And one of my favorite songs in the early 80s was Stand and Deliver, and I can still see him on Top of the Pops on BBC in our one television that we had in our living room, and that was the only place you could consume any media when I was growing up. But the Adam Ant case in law school was about IP and how you bring IP to the world in a meaningful way. And that really made me decide this is what I want to do. And at Fenwick, my practice, as I said, focuses on sort of primary care intellectual property counseling for our client base, which is all tech focused, or as I like to say, bringing joy to the world one company at a time, because I focus a lot on video games and content and food tech and music and all of the things that people enjoy in their lives. And we look at it from an IP and transactional perspective. So as you can imagine, all of the things that a company would think about, including data, which is a huge issue today and wasn't a huge issue a while ago, come into play there.
When you counsel a company, but for both of you, like when you counsel a company from zero, as you said, Evan, when you're talking to them and sussing out, like what's the business model here? What's the importance of data, both from a kind of like in your mind, Evan, maybe prepping them for what they're going to go through as they try to raise, as they try to grow, and Jennifer, from your perspective, like what do I have to protect? What do I have to help them protect? What are the things that you're both kind of thinking about? Maybe start with you, Jennifer, in those scenarios. Like what when you're like, I'm especially interested in when they're very like in their infancy and it's maybe 2, 3, 4 people starting the company.
Great question. And I think I'll start with observing that it's a different answer today than it would have been when I started at Fenwick in the year 2000. And frankly, when I was practicing law back in Ireland in the late 90s. Today, data is always front and center because despite the business model of the company, there is data relevant for personal interest purposes and then just for asset purposes. So in a B2C play, figuring out who your users or your customers are and how you can connect with them and what resonates with them and how your privacy story is going to be and what their privacy story is going to be and what they care about are table stakes for products and services. And so privacy by design is a term of art that's bandied around a lot. And I think companies today, even if it's just 4 founders in a garage somewhere here in Silicon Valley, are still thinking about that as it goes forward because investors are going to ask about it, companies are going to ask about it, users are going to ask about it right at the beginning.
So you think that's ubiquitous now? I mean, you can answer it too, but that is something that's known and the founders are even thinking about at that moment.
I think, and Evan, I'll be interested to hear your perspective. I think for a savvy founder who has looked at his or her market, it's going to be on the list. It mightn't be top of the list, but it's going to be on the list. And I'll just add, I don't think it was top of the list 20 years ago or even 15 years ago in a way that it is today. Evan?
Yeah, I think it's industry specific as opposed to industry agnostic. I think it's more heavily skewed in certain industries than others. But the first thing I think of it at a little bit higher level, and I try to ask just sort of 2 questions, like what is it and how are you using it? So at that very basic level, like let's start thinking about your data holistically, and what kind of data are you collecting directly or indirectly? What kind of data are you collecting and how are you using it? Are you using it for specific purposes or are you using it for de-identified purposes to figure out how people are interacting with your platform, or are you actually sort of using it for demographics? And at that point, there are decision trees to make, and we'll sort of talk about actions we can take as we start to build the company and build the structure around what and how when it comes to data. And yeah, early.
What?
Good.
So, sorry, Andy. Like, you guys, I hear this a lot, and maybe because you're in the M&A team or you're in the M&A space, you might be able to illuminate this for me a little bit. The category that the term tech company, what does that mean? I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
What's
it's a great
yeah.
question, right? Because I had a mentor coming up, through a really large chunk of my practice, and he used to say, this was probably in the mid 2000s. He said every company is a tech company now, right? Because every company has to have some sort of. There isn't just a company that just sells boxes anymore. They're a tech company. So, I think that it's a good question. I don't necessarily know how to answer it, but I think that, like, for example, I just did a webinar earlier today where I interviewed a founder of a company called The Sill, and The Sill is that she sells plants, B2C, and they deliver them to your house, and she's had huge growth in the last 6 months. Would we call her a tech company? I mean, no. Yes and no, right? She's selling a plant, but they're interacting on the platform. She's taking payments over on her website. She's chatting and interacting. So I think it's just it's a very broad term.
And I guarantee you, at some point in that founder's journey, she said something, or her board, or she said something to her board like, "We're actually a data company."
Well, I hope so.
Maybe not.
Evaluation.
You hear that a lot too. Like,
right?
you hear that same statement a lot too. Oh no, we're actually a data company, and
Right.
it's trickier.
But I'll give you an example that confuses me, and just interested to hear from you guys what you think. So, like, when I think of Grubhub, Uber Eats, Seamless, and I know I'm forgetting a big one. Sorry, Eat24 and whatever. All these, like, DoorDash. That's the one I was forgetting, and DoorDash, right? So I think of those. My brain automatically thinks tech companies, Silicon Valley, whatever. How are they different from Domino's Pizza? Like, it's Domino's Pizza has an app and delivers pizza. Like, what's the difference?
Well, isn't Domino's Pizza a tech company too, though? If we're using
that's what they say, right? But that's what they say, right? Like,
yeah.
But I don't think my mom thinks of Domino's Pizza as a tech company, but I know she would think of Grubhub as one, right? Like,
things have changed.
I'm trying to figure out what
things have changed. I think we're conditioned differently, right? We're the four of us are talking here are tech lawyers, so we're obviously skewed in a direction. But a company that the Fenwick team is representing from 0 or 1 or 2 years, first round, like if it's a DoorDash, that company was conceived a certain way, and Domino's has evolved. And McDonald's is an example I use quite a bit. It was a client at my last company. I use them as an example a lot when I'm talking about Alice and I'm explaining how Alice works. And it is the scenario I often use is, we'll say you're a software company and you want to sell your marketing software to McDonald's. People are always like, "Oh, really?" And yeah, well, think about it. They have a huge technology stack. Of course they're buying marketing technology. And if you're trying to identify 50 VPs at a place that might be, in the market to make a big tech purchase, then yeah, you might be looking at how to engage with those people. So I'd like to hear what you guys think, but I think the world's changed a lot around that.
We think a lot about industries as opposed to it being tech. It's too generic a term right now, I think. And, if you take an example, our client Airbnb, is it a tech company? Is it a tourist company? Is it a rental business? Is it any of the above? I think your point, Pedro, about, what does your mom think? I think the community thinks what it thinks. And I think the community may not think that Grubhub is a tech company either. It's a company that delivers food. Oftentimes what we see is there's the product offering in the industry, and then there's the customer base, B2C, B2B, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, the success of the business is, am I delivering, selling, offering solutions that companies, people want? And then it's inevitable that tech is a part of all of this. And I think to extrapolate a little bit on what you alluded to earlier, Andy, data is really an asset now because technology enables the manipulation of data and the value add to data in a way that it didn't 50 years ago, let's say.
But also, isn't technology just sort of also a catalyst for sales and marketing?
Yep.
And people are using it for that purpose. I mean, look at the biggest company in the world now is Amazon. Is Amazon a tech company? I mean, they sell stuff, right? And they started off selling books, but they wouldn't exist, right, without the technology that they have. But I don't know that traditionally. I think people think maybe of your mother's generation, maybe even of my parents' generation. Oh, well, only Microsoft is a tech company, and Oracle, they're a tech company, but Uber is just, I don't know, you get a car from them. So I do think that it's been a paradigm shift, probably the biggest paradigm shift in the last 100 years, in the last 10.
How is it?
Here's why I think, sorry, Andy, here's why I think this is an important distinction. And I'm of the point of view that in order to be characterized as a tech company, your primary deliverable has to be of a technology enabler or a device, meaning you either your what you give the public or your customer, if it's B2B, is a piece of technology like a laptop or some sort of software, whether that's SaaS or not, doesn't matter, right? Like some sort of technological solution. So like back to Grubhub versus Domino's. Domino's revenue comes from selling pizzas, right? Like Grubhub's comes from the delivery of food. However, what they really do is provide consumers with a channel to buy food. Like that's how I think of it. Here's why it's important though, in my point of view, because I think, like I'm watching these hearings today, Facebook, Twitter, and Google, these congressional hearings, and you listen to politicians talk about how big tech is out of control and all the usual stuff. And I think the expectations for data governance and privacy are somehow elevated for companies that we think of as being in the technology sector by their nature. I don't know that that's appropriate, but I think that's the truth. Because, for example, a company that was not at that hearing is another tech company, Amazon tech company, who has as much or more data than some of the companies on that hearing, right? Like about us, right? About our behaviors and our preferences, and has a huge advertising business, for example. So I guess I'm saying all of that to say, whether or not it's appropriate, we have what I think are these additional expectations of how tech companies are going to govern themselves when they access our information. But even within that expectation, we have inconsistencies. Like not all the right players are being held to the same standard.
The fact that Amazon is not there is
ridiculous to me.
Emblematic of how little that group knows. Like they are, because of AWS, they are the backbone of nearly every tech company out there. They're on every sub-processor list you will ever see in your life. Mainly.
In the world.
Them or GCP or somebody. So like, it's sort of ludicrous, right?
What I think is fascinating is also, Pedro, your definition of a tech company, especially because of where you work, right? I mean, you work at sort of the quintessential deliverer of enterprise or SaaS software-based solutions, right? So for you, that's sort of like exactly in the vortex of tech companies, right? Doesn't, which I think is an interesting definition. And I think you're making a very fascinating sort of bifurcation, a line bifurcation.
Yeah. I agree, and fully agree also with your point about, what the world thinks as a tech company actually isn't necessarily what is the reality. And I think your point is an excellent one on, any company that leverages the ability to access and manipulate data and know what data, how to put it to work. One could argue should be subject to exactly the same scrutiny as a company that labels itself as such. Because the end result and the impact on the world, good or bad, whatever our perspective is going to be the same for consumers. So I think it's an important distinction. One probably that people like us only worry about, but that's kind of a different conversation.
But the revenue is an interesting way to distinguish also, right? If your revenue is predominantly driven by the sale of technology as a service, as opposed to the sale of something being used by technology, that's another different distinction.
Do you think?
Yeah, and
Do you
Go
think
ahead,
that
Andy.
do you think that the viewpoint of venture capital investors, how has that impacted this in the sense of you both are probably interacting with these parties a lot when they're assessing companies now? Some of this I think is just influenced by who's willing to put money on the table for certain types of companies and their particular viewpoint on what they're willing to invest in. Having seen a smidgen of these, not nearly as many as you all have, that seems apparent to me. They've got a take and they've got an opinion on it, and that's evolved a little bit over time, but they're willing to put their money more often in a company that looks a certain way or has a certain execution pattern.
Yeah, I mean, look, the venture capital model, I think that we all sort of understand and know it, but you know, they're going to have a fund, and they need one company to return the fund, and that one company, you know, they're expecting 100x. So everything else, not that it doesn't matter, but they need 100x return or so on a company in the portfolio, and technology, for whatever reason in the last 20 or 30 years, as opposed to maybe the 20 or 30 years before that, when it was either, you know, it was what he does, or even way before that, it was, you know, industry. Technology is the only way that people see to get that multiple. So yeah, venture capital for sure is sort of driving what people think of as a technology company. They're the ones that are putting the label on it.
Super M&A in the weeds question. When you know, and I've done my fair share of M&A. I've been involved in my fair share of M&A transactions since I've been in house and even when I was in private practice. But obviously not in the trenches as much as you guys. When you're working on either side of an M&A transaction, but particularly when you're in the position of the acquirer, right? And you're asking the target, the company you're trying to buy, for disclosures about like their data governance. How deep can you probe into what their data practices are, particularly around their data privacy practices? And has that changed in the last couple of years? Meaning, do you have more access, less access, more transparency, less transparency? Like, how's that evolving?
I think it has evolved significantly from where I sit, and I would say there's the dynamic of the deal is always important, right? So let's assume you're a target that wants to be bought, and there's a nice price tag, and there's a good story to tell, and there's a good alignment with the acquirer, which is usually the case, right? If the deal is serious, then access to the data compliance practices, data governance practices, etc., is open access, actually. And I see that again and again in our practice. And you can imagine, you know, if you're the acquirer, you don't want to buy a problem. You know, data privacy, there's a lot of risk associated with non-compliance, theoretical or real. There are scary fines that are attached to non-compliance with certain laws and so on. How those manifest themselves can be sort of theoretical for lawyers, but they're practical too. And, you know, if you're the deal broker who's trying to figure out whether, you know, my company is buying a problem or not, it manifests itself in those areas. And if you take a simple saying, you know, I've seen this, I'm obviously not going to name names, but I have seen deals fall through in the kids' data compliance area, for example, right? So compliance with COPPA is very regulated. There's a lot of things companies have to do. It's really bad if you collect kids' information without getting the appropriate consents and so on. And if you're looking to buy a company and there's no COPPA compliance strategy and there's a bunch of tainted data there, it can be, you're really buying liability by taking those data, those user accounts. So we've seen deals either fall through for reasons like that, or I've seen one deal where our client sort of bought the technology but didn't take any of the users, which you can imagine is kind of not a great experience for people who are using a platform. All of a sudden, like, you wake up, boom, I can't use it anymore, and this horrible devil company over here bought it and is now changing it, which isn't actually the reality. It was a much more reasoned decision to not take the data, but I've absolutely seen that. You see the same in healthcare. HIPAA compliance is super complex, and buying a company that hasn't got its ducks in a row there can result in sort of buying liability. And some of that can be fixed and some can't. But I would say certainly from where we sit, there is a heightened understanding in the boardroom, at the executive level, at the deal maker level, right down to the people who are trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do with this data when I get it over into my tech company from a developer level too. So I would say it's actually quite different. And I've really seen an evolution of that over my years at Fenwick.
This is a great example of the way the movies romanticize deal making. And then, it's very unromantic when you're negotiating reps and warranties, around these things. It's very unlike Wall Street. Nobody's making crazy moves and maneuvers and stuff. So is it like these, would you say that these reps and warranties have elevated themselves in terms of the importance of the negotiation, in maybe as in the past? I mean, or other parts of the M&A or financing transactions still more important than the data piece?
I can respond to that, and then I'd like to hear what my partner Evan says. So first of all, 100% agree. If someone was making a movie of our lives doing deals, that would be some dull, boring stuff to watch. It's not even people sitting in a data room anymore. I remember where we used to actually like physically go places and you could sit, kind of hang out, and there's fun. If you tried, you could make it visually appealing if you took the outtakes and made it into kind of a funny movie. But now it's sitting in front of a computer looking at a data room that's hosted by some tech company, and you're just looking at documents, really dull stuff. But I think the reps and warranties, I mean, you can look at it again if you really want to not be entertained in the movie world. The data privacy rep was 2 paragraphs or a sentence, 15 years ago. Now it's like 5 paragraphs or a few pages, depending on what it is. So yeah, 100%. I think the dynamic has changed. It doesn't mean you can't have a punchy conversation though. And you could act and you could pretend you're Gordon Gekko in those discussions if you tried. But I definitely think there's been a change. Evan, what do you see? I think from the risk shifting perspective on the deal overall, I'm sure you see the impact there too.
Yeah, look, I think that people have gotten a lot smarter about data in the last 10 years, right? And they've also gotten smarter about how to use it and how to protect it, because I see less and less real hand-wringing and over data than I think I used to. Like I remember that we had a venture on the investor side. I had a venture capital. It's probably 9 years ago. Venture capitalists walk away from a deal at the very end because the target company or the company that they were investing in just had terrible processes and procedures for their data protection. I mean, it was like, you guys need to redo this whole thing, and we're walking away. And I don't think that would happen now. It's too top of mind.
Yeah.
So I think, and if it does happen, I think it's fleshed out pretty early. Like by the time you get to real M&A, hopefully you've got good counselors. Really, like honestly, you've got good counselors along the way that are saying, whether it's your bank or your lawyers, that are saying, hey, in order to get to a real M&A, you got to make sure this is tight. So I don't think we see deals die in the last minute. There could be a price adjustment somewhere early on because of it.
Yeah, I don't think they're dying, at least not only in rare scenarios where maybe the data asset was the target of the thing that was happening. I've actually seen that happen where the collection practices around the data asset were suspect. And so
yeah, I can tell you,
fundamental, right?
Yeah, I'll say, I have to be really careful here. So like at multiple employers, I have seen transactions get tanked for data privacy and cybersecurity issues. And just on the target side, the issues were on the target side.
And when did they die, Pedro? Like what point of the deal?
Good question.
the decisions were made at the highest levels, and we were past the LOIs, the letter of intent stage, and at some in an advanced stages of diligence.
That's pretty.
So I've seen it.
I've seen that too. Yeah, I've seen it too, Pedro. But I do agree with Evan's comment that it is, companies on both sides are more solution oriented now. So unless it's a nuclear issue, there's desire to kind of solve it. You know, so if it's a mature company that should have known what it's doing and there's a ton of liability, that's different. But there's a much more sophisticated level of understanding on both sides that we see now in terms of how do we fix this, and maybe there's a price adjustment or a risk adjustment or something like that, or we take this but we don't take that, to kind of bifurcate it out. So it's sort of an understanding of figuring out kind of where the push pull is, as opposed to what you said, Andy, which is, oh my God, I don't know what's going on here. This is too scary, so I'm not gonna go ahead with that.
More frequently, what's happening, I agree with all that, and more frequently, like, I think what's happening is just this elongation of the process caused by some of these things, and sort of just a lot more focus on it. So to Evan's point, companies are savvy to it, so are the investors, and so one time I was part of it, like just an inside round, you know, existing investors investing in the company, and we had a diligence phone call, and it was me and the CFO, and I thought to myself, oh, cool, like I'm just going to be listening here. This is mostly going to be him updating them on where the company is financially. And lo and behold, it was 95% me talking about data and privacy. We got out of there, and I said, I just did not expect that. I would have maybe, you know, luckily we were in decent shape, but it was a funny experience. And I think that's emblematic maybe of like just where maybe just more time is being spent there on kind of that side now. Lately.
Yeah.
Well, I think also the consumer and people that are not even on the call like this, that don't even think about this stuff, the consumer it's just on their minds too, right? Literally today, I got 3 calls from the Social Security Administration. It's shocking that they keep calling me and telling me that my Social Security number is getting hacked.
Yeah.
But I happen to be a tech lawyer, right? So it's all over, you know, I get it. This stuff is just pervasive. So it's not just top of mind for us, it's top of mind data and identity protection. Look, I've got a number of clients that are creating solutions for identity protection and verification online. You know, being able to multi-factor identify who you are. So it's everywhere.
You know what I've seen? You know what else? I've seen a lot of activity in the last year and a half of like either identity, I don't even know what to call this category of companies, but companies that deal with identity, whatever, yeah. I don't know what that category is called, security and privacy. So think like the OneTrusts and the big IDs and these things of the world, sweeping each other up, buying each other, you know, there's a lot of acquisition in the privacy and security as a service space. I hope I just made that up. That'd be super dope, but I don't think I did. But in that space, I've seen a lot of activity. Are you guys seeing the same, or is this me being anecdotal? And why do you think that is? And if you think it is, will it continue?
Yeah, no, I mean, I haven't seen like, I mean, it's not a huge market in my opinion, but I am seeing money being put behind it and smart people thinking about it. And why? Because I think everybody does all of their transaction online, and everybody is scared, right? So you're like 1Password, you know, do you guys own 1Password? Maybe you bought.
I know that's the like password manager.
Yeah.
I know about it. I don't use it. Yeah.
But yeah, I just think it's top of mind. You know, I have 2 companies that are doing the exact same thing on this online verification. I've got another cybersecurity company that's attacking another part of the market. So yeah, it's everywhere for sure.
And a leader might emerge. Probably will. I mean, I think we see this again and again in different industries when you've got people kind of grappling for that prize of being the leader or the preferred services provider, whatever you want to call it, in this area of, I can give you a certification to say you're all buttoned up, or I can guarantee that your single sign-on works. So I think that's a movie we've seen before in different industries. So it doesn't surprise me at all that we see that trend now. I mean, one other point, which I think is an interesting one and much more existential, how consumers really think about privacy and how much they care. And I agree with you, Evan, to an extent, right? Because I think there are people who really care about this stuff. But then, you have to sort of balance that with then, prolific social media users who put their whole lives out there on their favorite social media channel visually and in any other way. And so I often see a contradiction between this intense desire for privacy and the intense desire to showcase my life to the world. And there's a dichotomy there. It's not the same as putting your social security number and your bank details and your other sensitive stuff on your Facebook feed, but people are also, there's a generational issue here, I think, too, where people are more likely to put stuff out there or not even not understand the risk, kind of just not care about it so much, which is another sort of topic that I think is being looked at in this kind of data space overall.
I have a question for Andy, because I know that he is obviously, based on these sessions, very sort of attuned to data privacy and security. Do you treat your own personal data privacy and security with the same sort of heightened scrutiny as you do, like with work and your work, or do you sort of have your same password, which is like your kids' names or something?
It's an interesting thought experiment question. I don't personally know. I mean, I don't personally treat it differently. Pedro does, and communicates, and he's a good person to compare to me. I think Pedro prefers to use Signal for texting as opposed to just texting somebody something. I'm a good example, Jennifer, of what you said of kind of the embracing technology. I'm in my 40s, but so I'm not, I've grown up with a lot of this stuff, and I embrace technology. I want what I want when I want it. And I think I'm part of that generation. If I'm logged into Google, I'm logged in. You've got me. You've got my email. You've got my calendar. You've got I want the One ID. I want the Apple ID. I want everything synced up. I want that. It's my life's too busy to have it any other way, to be honest. I couldn't survive without linked calendars and things like this with my wife, and trying to manage schedules of 2 small children, and there's just the convenience to me way overshadows some of the privacy challenges. And I've had my identity stolen a couple times, and I've had incidents happen at work, and they suck, and you don't like it when it happens. But I'm yes, privacy focused general counsel. I'm knowingly making that trade-off. So I'm different than Pedro, I think, in a little bit.
I'll say I share it with Andy in the fact that my entire existence is really tied to 4 companies, right? And Apple, everything on my desk is Apple, on my watch, my phones, whatever. Amazon, overwhelming majority of my shopping happens through that platform. Facebook, because I use Instagram, WhatsApp, and the Facebook platform for socializing, and then Google for productivity, right? And I use all these suites, and I use them as comprehensively as anybody else. But I'll hang a caveat on that. I have migrated a lot of texting to Signal, especially when it's of a sensitive nature, business or personal, doesn't matter. 2, I don't use Google search. I use DuckDuckGo and have for 10 years. So I don't use their search. And 3, on all these platforms, all 4 of those companies I just mentioned, all of my privacy settings are set to most restrictive, right? I go through the process on Google's platform to not let them track my videos on YouTube, to not let them retarget me, to not let them collect my location information on their Google Maps. Apple, got this Apple Watch today. I upgraded my watch. I make sure that it's not sharing statistics and analytics data with Apple. They can get that from somebody else. I'm not going to get it from Pedro, the privacy lawyer. It's just not going to be things that I do. I don't allow any of the software that I use to like send data to the, you know, like when your thing crashes, it's like, do you want to send it to Apple? No, I don't. I'm not interested. Like if I have a problem, I'll call Apple. And, you know, same thing with Google, like everything's restricted. I go through that process because I'm wonky. I don't think it's fair to ask everybody to go through that process, right? There has to be some kind of a global, like, this is my preference and let it apply everywhere. Smarter people than I will figure out how to make that solution. But I think I am wonky about it, even though I use all the stuff because you have to.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear both your perspectives there. I am probably somewhere in the middle. You know, like you said, Andy, I'm okay with seeing targeted ads because I know why they're there. Sometimes I kind of appreciate it actually because I'm super busy and I forgot to click, you know, buy in the Nordstrom cart, and then I see it again. I'm like, oh, I was kind of deciding, and now I've decided, but I feel like I am intentionally making that decision. I've had this conversation with friends who say you're really not, you're being convinced to do it in ways that subliminally you don't know. And then, you know, the notion that data is aggregate or anonymized, and let's assume that it is, right? You know, if I think about my home here in San Francisco, I'm totally fine on an from an IoT perspective with the city of San Francisco having an understanding about our water consumption or whatever, our electricity, when we turn on our dishwasher, anything that's connected to our systems here in our house, if that, you know, can be used altruistically, you know, to make the city more efficient or whatever. I understand that there are nefarious uses of those kind of information too. Part of me, and it's a cynical perspective, wonders, you know, who really cares in a way that's really meaningful. Of course, I know there are, you know, bad things that can happen. And I have a very good friend who's wicked smart. She's a lawyer, not a data privacy lawyer. And she said to me once, I don't put stuff on Facebook and I don't use Facebook because I just don't feel comfortable with like my pictures being on a Facebook server somewhere, but I'm completely fine with WhatsApp. And I was like, well, you do know Facebook owns WhatsApp, don't you? And she was like, oh. And it was kind of a little bit of an aha moment. This is somebody who's very smart, but a totally different type of lawyer to the type of lawyers we are. And she kind of had a moment where she was like, oh God, I got to rethink that whole like moral decision I made for myself and my family, you know? So anyway, I think there's a lot of.
But maybe she doesn't, right? Like maybe intuitively she made the right choice because Facebook owns WhatsApp, but WhatsApp is a much more, you know, end-to-end encrypted. I don't want to use the word secure, but it's a much more private way.
You're right. No, you're right. And it's a different experience, and that
exactly
use resonates with a consumer, which ultimately I actually think kind of informs how we as humans react. Even people like us who kind of know more than your average person might about why things are the way they are and why you decide to set your privacy settings as you do.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to hear people in the industry how they sort of treat their own personal stuff. I have CEOs that are hyper sensitive. I'm probably squarely in Andy's camp. But I do change my I change my Gmail password fairly regularly because I feel like if someone could read Gmail is the key to everything, right? Because you could get into your Gmail and your bank account number, and it's game over.
And your texts. I feel like text is where all the sensitive action is. And the younger you get, probably the crazier text message pools of data are, right? So like iCloud, whatever, WhatsApp Cloud, or whatever that is, those places are delicate. But I'm with you, by the way. I don't necessarily change my Gmail password all the time, but I use my Google password is different than the password for everything else. And I think it's because I share your same kind of like, this is kind of a very sensitive space, right? Where I'm sharing all sorts of stuff with.
Suggestion for your next one is Blue Horseshoe loves Anacott Steel.
Steel. Yeah. Well done. You successfully brought in
thank you both. Thank you both so much for joining us. This was totally awesome. I could talk to you guys for another 2 hours.
Yeah, this could be a 3-hour
podcast. Yeah.
By the way, we can't let you go before I say one thing, or he'll be mad at me. Jim Koenig at Fenwick owes me some stone crabs, and I'm putting him on blast here. He's my hometown buddy. So say hi to Jim for me and tell him he owes me stone crabs next time I see him.
I definitely will. We will.
It's a great team at Fenwick, from the privacy
That's an
angle,
awesome team.
VC angle, all sorts of other parts of the firm. So thank you both for being with us. It's awesome to have you both. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Bye.